how SJVC sends out literally hundreds of their healthcare students into their hospital clinics in the surrounding communities to literally work on these little baby pediatric children in life or death emergency situations, which, by the way, is what the PALS certification is all about, then how in the world is that particular practice supposed to square with SJVC's claim that, quote, we want to make sure that we send safe healthcare practitioners into our clinics? Well, you know what? It doesn't. And then when you simply ask yourself, if all the parents in these surrounding communities were to just simply at least be made aware of this practice by SJVC, then what parent in their right mind, if God forbid they were to have a life or death emergency situation with their little child, what parent would ever want to take their child to the emergency room of any hospital where they knew that the clinical students who were going to be working on their little child were only said to be qualified in the pediatric emergency care process, when in reality that student had only been certified by way of the college simply giving the answers to that pediatric emergency certification test? Well, not me. Not with my little girl. No way, no way, no way. Because, you see, I actually chose to get into healthcare because I care. And what a novel concept, right? And then to boot, after that, after I graduated, I had every intention of working with little children as a respiratory therapist, since I too, as a child, had once suffered from respiratory problems. And I even had a pneumonia twice, from which I, in an emergency situation, also came very close to dying from. So this issue of not just the public safety, but of the safety of the public's children in emergency situations was of paramount importance to me here. And that's also why, even back within my September 7th letter of complaint to the Dean of Students, that I had very specifically posed the following question within my complaint letter to SJVC officials, which is, how does this kind of practice of giving the answers to the PALS test actually reinforce the safety of a college's clinical workers, and thus ensure safe practitioners in the healthcare field? And so therefore, if it were to be verified in a court of law that SJVC had actually engaged in such a practice, and then to boot, that SJVC knowingly did it on a regular basis, then I would venture to say that likely most of SJVC's hospital clinics, if not probably all of SJVC's hospital clinics, would also likely not want those kind of students at their clinics. Therefore, as a result of SJVC having allowed such a practice, wherein the students were clearly disallowed to even have the chance to pass the PALS test independently, then such a practice, number one, automatically disqualifies such a test from even being a legitimate test to begin with, and also, number two, substantiates the fact that the PALS subject was previously not covered well enough to begin with, so as to enable the students to pass the test independently. Otherwise, why would any teacher ever engage in such a practice of so flagrantly just giving the answers to such an important test? That is, if the teacher was really confident that the subject matter was covered thoroughly enough to begin with. Therefore, SJVC is actually keenly aware that if such a practice were to be revealed and verified, that they had actually engaged in such a non-quality educational practice, then they know exactly how that such a practice, or how that such a revelation could very well likely jeopardize SJVC's primary accreditation from WASC. And since the WASC accreditation serves as SJVC's literal gateway through which the U.S. Department of Education allows SJVC to have access to literally millions of dollars worth of revenue that comes from their students obtaining federal loans, then that is this is what constitutes the real reason why SJVC eventually terminated me in the way that they did. For in no way did SJVC wish to provide me with any fair due process that would have even come close to revealing what the main legitimate complaint was really all about in the first place. However, what's really strange, very strange, about the whole scenario is that if anyone were to just simply read my letter of complaint to the Dean of Students, they would very easily see that all I was ever asking for was for SJVC to not allow the RT program director to use the non-quality educational practices within the PALS program as his academic standard of measurement by which to academically judge and penalize me by, as the RT program director was clearly trying to do. For even when I had previously taken the time clear back on August 9th of 2010, about a month before I even officially complained about it, to verbally, sincerely share my complaints to the RT program director about the kind of non-quality educational practices that I was subject to within the PALS program, and especially the previously mentioned practice. That's when he then immediately thereafter, meaning within seconds of having just shared my complaints to him, turned right around and then used that very same PALS educational program as being his academic standard of measurement by which to academically judge and penalize me by. His academic judgment was that I should have to repeat the whole 3 months, the whole 4 months of the third term all over again, which is explained more in my September 7th complaint. But the very fact that the program director had even been so quick as to pronounce such a harsh academic judgment upon me within seconds, before even making any effort at all on his part to at least first try to verify if any of my complaints were true or not, then such hubris behavior only served to speak volumes to me personally about how the RT program director evidently didn't seem to care a whit about the quality of education within the program, his own program. Therefore, hence my official September 7th complaint to the Dean of Students. So then, what was SJVC's response to my September 7th complaint? Well, before I now tell you what that response was, it's first very extremely important to understand one very solid, undeniable fact upon which this whole case rests. That would simply be that despite the fact that SJVC's own programmatic accrediting agency, COARC, that is the Commission on Accreditation for Respiratory Care, had clearly required of SJVC, specifically within Standard 5.05 on page 28 of COARC Standards Manual, that a neutral mechanism like an ombudsman be provided to a student during any grievance appeals procedure. That nevertheless, at no time during the 3 weeks that followed from September 7th clear up to September 29th did SJVC ever provide me with any fair due process that involved any kind of neutral mechanism by which a fair evaluation could ever be ensured. None. Zero, zip, nada. In other words, I was absolutely railroaded, obviously by SJVC's design, with no neutral mechanism like an ombudsman or ever having been provided to me, so as to fairly have my academic interests or concerns represented when I had appealed to the Dean of Students in my September 7th letter of complaint about the quality of education that I was promised and for which I had dearly paid for. Instead, what summarily followed shortly after my September 7th complaint were numerous inappropriate situations, behaviors, and statements which were leveled against me, again for which I had found myself having absolutely no fair representation to protect my academic interests at all. For example, in a meeting I had on September 13th of 2010 with the RT program director, I, number one, had previously found out and had confirmed to me within this September 13th meeting that the RT program director had tried to cover up the fact that they had actually just gave all the answers to those students just to get them certified by way of very carefully choosing a couple of hand-selected students so as to use them to cover up and hide the fact that SJVC had actually ever engaged in such a practice. Then number two, right after that, the program director also proceeded to express to me his extreme displeasure that I had went, quote unquote, outside the chain of command, outside his chain of command, in order to accomplish or complain about the practices of which I had detailed in my September 7th complaint. But of course, I'd not gone outside the chain of command, as he said, but I had instead, what I had simply followed the complaint procedures as outlined in the SJVC student handbook. And then he immediately thereafter, again within seconds,